Okay, let's jump into this. We're doing a deep dive today, focusing specifically on Matthew chapter 12.
Right.
Our goal, really, is to unpack the key interactions, the teachings, and, well, the conflicts in this section.
And there's a lot going on. It's quite dense.
Definitely. We want to explore what was really at stake for everyone involved.
Yeah, because it touches on some huge themes. Conflicts over the Sabbath, for sure, but also challenges to Jesus's identity, his authority, how he responds to opposition.
And even like a redefinition of family, which comes in later.
Exactly. Big stuff.
So let's start right at the beginning of the chapter, the first big conflict, the one about the Sabbath.
Okay, so the scene is pretty simple. Jesus and his disciples, they're walking through grain fields. It's the Sabbath.
And the disciples are hungry. Seems reasonable enough.
Right, so they start picking heads of grain to eat, just, basic need.
But the Pharisees see it, and immediately there's a confrontation.
Yep. The text says they challenge him directly. Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath.
Straight away, it highlights that clash, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Between the strict interpretation of the rules and, well, human need.
It really does. And Jesus's response is fascinating. He doesn't just dismiss the law.
No, he uses their own scriptures.
Exactly. He brings up David. Remember when David and his companions were hungry?
Ah, yes. They ate the consecrated bread in the house of God.
Right, which the text itself points out was technically only lawful for the priests to eat.
But they were hungry. That's the key point he seems to be making.
It is. And then he uses another example, the priests working in the temple on the Sabbath.
Their duties required work, didn't they? Sacrifices, rituals.
Yes, work that could be seen as desecrating the Sabbath by a purely literal reading. Yet they're considered innocent because it's necessary temple service.
So he's building a case using their own framework, showing there are higher principles at play.
Precisely. And then he pivots to his own authority. This is where it gets really significant.
He says, well, one greater than the temple is here.
One greater than the temple. I mean, just pause on that for a second.
That's a massive claim. Positioning himself above the most sacred place in Judaism.
And then he quotes Hosea, I desire mercy, not sacrifice.
Which cuts right through their legalistic focus.
It does. He connects it by saying if they'd understood that, they wouldn't have condemned the innocent, meaning his disciples.
He's saying their judgment missed the whole point of God's character. Mercy over ritual.
And then comes the climax of this exchange. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.
Right after being accused of breaking Sabbath rules, that's bold.
Incredibly bold. He's not just interpreting the Sabbath, he's claiming authority over it, master of the Sabbath.
But this doesn't quiet the opposition, does it? The conflict just shifts.
Not at all. It moves immediately to another Sabbath incident, this time inside a synagogue.
The man with the shriveled hand.
Yes, and the text is explicit about the Pharisees' motives here.
They were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. Setting a trap.
Exactly. They ask him point blank, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?
Trying to corner him. Heal and break their rules. Don't heal and seem powerless or uncaring.
But Jesus flips it back on them. He uses an analogy.
The sheep in the pit.
Right. If one of your sheep falls into a pit on the Sabbath, wouldn't you rescue it? Even just one sheep?
Common sense, really. You protect your property, your livestock.
So Jesus draws the comparison. How much more valuable is a man than a sheep?
Obvious when you put it like that.
And his conclusion, therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. He establishes this principle, human need, doing good, that takes precedence.
And having laid out the principle, he acts. He tells the man.
Stretch out your hand.
And the healing is immediate.
Instantly. Completely restored, just as sound as the other. Right there, in front of everyone. Undeniable.
So, faced with this clear act of compassion and power,
yeah,
what do the Pharisees do?
This is where it gets really chilling. The text says they went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus.
Wow. Just like that. From accusation to a murder plot.
It shows the depth of the threat they felt. This wasn't just about rules anymore.
How does Jesus react to this plot?
He withdraws. Doesn't force a confrontation then and there.
A strategic move. But he doesn't stop his work.
No. The text says many people followed him as he withdrew, and he healed all their sick.
Still demonstrating that power and mercy, even while under threat.
And interestingly, it adds that he warned them not to tell who he was.
Which leads right into the next section, doesn't it? About his identity and how it connects to prophecy.
Exactly. With the opposition now at this legal level, the focus shifts to who he is and the source of his power. Matthew links Jesus' actions with drawing, healing quietly, to Isaiah.
Ah, the quote about the chosen servant.
Yes. Here is my servant whom I have chosen, the one I love, in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him.
And he will proclaim justice to the nations. It paints a specific picture of the Messiah.
It does, and it describes his manner. He will not quarrel or cry out. No one will hear his voice in the streets.
A gentle approach. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out.
Till he leads justice to victory. In his name, the nations will put their hope. It frames him as this gentle, justice-focused, hope-bringing figure, not necessarily the conquering hero some expected.
And right after setting up his prophetic identity, there's another healing.
A really significant one. A man possessed by a demon who was also blind and mute. Multiple afflictions.
And Jesus heals him completely.
Completely. The text says he could both talk and see, a demonstration of power over both the spiritual and physical realms.
How did the crowds react to this one?
They were amazed, astonished, and they start asking the crucial question, could this be the son of David?
The messianic title. They're starting to connect the dots, seeing his power, and wondering he's the promised one.
Exactly. That title carries all the weight of Israel's hopes.
But the Pharisees, they offer a very different explanation for his power.
A deeply disturbing one. They say he drives out demons by Beelzebub, the prince of demons.
Beelzebub, attributing God's work to the devil himself. That's extreme.
It's the ultimate rejection, really. And the text notes Jesus knew their thoughts. He addresses this head on.
With logic, right?
Yes, impeccable logic. First, the divided kingdom. Every kingdom divided against itself will be ruined.
And every city or household divided against itself will not stand.
Makes sense?
So, if Satan is driving out Satan, his own kingdom is in chaos, how could it survive? It undermines their core accusation.
He then kind of turns it back on them, doesn't he?
He does. He asks if he's using Beelzebub's power, whose power do their own exorcists use?
Pointing out the inconsistency. If they accept exorcisms by their own people.
Then they will be your judges, he says. It exposes the hypocrisy.
And then he delivers the alternative, the real source of his power.
But if I drive out demons by the Spirit of God, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. His actions are evidence that God's rule is breaking in.
He uses that analogy too, the strong man's house.
Right. You can't rob a strong man unless you tie him up first.
So he's not working for the strong man, Satan. He's overpowering him, binding him to rescue those held captive. It shows his authority over evil.
And this leads to that really stark declaration about allegiance. No middle ground.
He who is not with me is against me, and he who does not gather with me scatters. The lines are being drawn very clearly.
You have to choose a side, which sets up his next very serious teaching.
On sin and blasphemy, he starts broadly. Every sin and blasphemy will be forgiven men.
Which sounds incredibly gracious, but then the exception.
The crucial exception. Blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven.
He clarifies that, right? Speaking against the Son of Man is forgivable.
Yes, but speaking against the Holy Spirit, attributing the clear work of God's Spirit to Satan, as they just did, that's different. It won't be forgiven either in this age or in the age to come.
It suggests a point of final resistance, a hardening of the heart against God's clearest actions. It's incredibly serious.
Terribly serious. And coming right after the Beelzebub accusation, you see the direct context.
This then flows into his teaching about where words actually come from.
The tree and its fruit analogy. Simple, but profound.
A good tree, good fruit. Bad tree, bad fruit. You know a tree by what it produces.
And he applies it directly to them, calling them a brood of vipers. Harsh language.
He asks, how can evil people say good things? Because words reveal the heart.
Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. That's such a key line. What's inside inevitably comes out.
Our words are evidence of our inner state.
Exactly. A good person draws on good stored up inside. An evil person draws on evil stored up.
And there's accountability for this. He warns about judgment.
For every careless word they have spoken.
Every careless word. That's a high bar. It makes you think about just how much weight our words carry.
Absolutely. He concludes, for by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. Words have ultimate consequences.
This intense focus on the heart and words leads straight into another confrontation.
Yes, some of the Pharisees and teachers come back with a demand.
Teacher, we want to see a miraculous sign from you.
After everything they've just witnessed, the healings, the exorcism.
It seems unbelievable. And Jesus' response is, well, sharp.
Very sharp. He calls them a wicked and adulterous generation for asking for a sign like this.
He refuses to perform on demand.
He does. He says no sign will be given except the sign of the prophet Jonah.
And he explains that sign refers to his own future.
Right. Just as Jonah was 3 days and nights in the belly of the fish, the Son of Man will be 3 days and nights in the heart of the earth. It points directly to his death and resurrection.
That's the sign they'll get, but not now, not on their terms.
And he contrasts their attitude with others who were receptive. He brings up the men of Nineveh.
They repented just at Jonah's preaching, no flashy miracles needed for them.
Exactly. And Jesus says they'll condemn this generation at judgment because someone greater than Jonah is here, and yet they demand more signs.
He also mentions the queen of the south, Sheba.
She came from afar just to hear Solomon's wisdom. She recognized value and sought it out.
And again, the point is,
Now one greater than Solomon is here, yet this generation remains resistant, demanding proof rather than recognizing the wisdom and power already present.
this theme of resistance, maybe spiritual blindness, seems linked to his next parable.
The one about the returning evil spirit, it's quite cautionary.
He describes the spirit leaving, wandering, finding no rest.
And deciding to return to the house I left.
Finds it unoccupied, swept clean, and put in order.
Sounds good initially, clean and orderly, but unoccupied is the danger zone.
Spiritual emptiness.
Precisely. Cleaning house isn't enough if you don't fill it with something good. So the spirit goes and gets 7 others, worse than itself.
And they all move in. The person's final state is worse than before.
A chilling picture, and Jesus applies it directly. That is how it will be with this wicked generation.
Suggesting that rejecting him, even if they appear outwardly clean, leaves them vulnerable to something much worse spiritually.
A profound warning about the dangers of spiritual vacancy or mere externalism.
And then the chapter takes a final, quite dramatic turn. Away from conflict, towards relationship.
Yes, while he's still talking to the crowd, his mother and brothers show up.
They're outside, wanting to speak with him. Someone lets him know.
Your mother and brothers are standing outside.
And Jesus' response is, again, unexpected. It must have surprised people.
He asks, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?"
Challenging the obvious biological answer.
He is. He then gestures towards his disciples.
And says, "Here are my mother and my brothers."
Redefining family right there. He states the new criterion. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother.
So true kinship isn't about blood ties anymore.
It's about spiritual alignment, obedience to God's will. That's what creates the true family, the true community around him. A radical shift.
It really is. Looking back at this whole chapter, it's just packed. The Sabbath clashes, the challenges to his authority, the Beelzebub accusation, the teachings on the heart and words.
The refusal to give signs on demand, the warning about spiritual emptiness, and then this profound redefinition of family, it all hangs together.
You see the opposition intensifying, but also Jesus clarifying his identity, his mission, and who truly belongs with him.
It lays crucial groundwork for everything that follows. The lines are drawn, the stakes are clear.
So as you think about everything we've discussed from Matthew 12, maybe consider this. How does the source of authority you rely on, whether it's tradition or maybe perceived power, or perhaps that deeper alignment with God's will? Jesus talks about how does that shape the way you view others, understand who Jesus is, and ultimately where you find your own sense of belonging.